Hello everybody, my name is 7th Bracken, this is The Silvered Cloud, my review show, and this is my very first review. Now all I need is an item to review that perfectly sets the tone for this series, and to be perfectly honest, gonna have to go with the Superman on this one. Ah yes, the original Christopher Reeve Superman film. It was spectacular when it came out and still holds a special place in the hearts of many to this day. It is widely regarded as one of the classic superhero films, and I can think of nothing more fitting for my first review than such an iconic film. So let's take a look at Superman 1 and see why it's so special. Starting with a look at the cover, and it's here where we come into contact with a particular problem. You see, my copy of Superman 1 actually comes from the Superman 4 film's favorite set, as opposed to a singular DVD release. The good news is, this means I can review the other 3 Superman movies later on, so be on the lookout for those. The bad news is that I don't have immediate access to the original covers for any of these movies, and in order to remedy this problem, I'll have to look up the covers online. This, however, leads to another problem. You see, these movies have been re-released a number of times with a bunch of different covers. Now, when this situation occurs, I'll usually just go with the first cover that comes up when I research the movie in question, unless I find one that I like more. In the case of Superman 1's cover, what we get is something very special. A gorgeous watercolor painting of some clouds placed over a black backdrop. One of the best things about this cover, in my opinion, has got to be that Superman doesn't actually appear on this cover directly, instead being showcased through some clever symbolism. The chrome Superman symbol is of course fairly obvious, and quite nice looking at that. Less obvious is the non-symmetrical streak of color that intersects with the Superman symbol, which is clearly supposed to be Superman flying off to someplace, probably to avert some sort of crisis. On a quick side note, the 3 colors we see representing Superman, in addition to being the 3 primary colors, are the colors most often used in superhero designs from the Golden Age of comics and several other heroic protagonist designs from other genres after the Golden Age. Speaking of the Golden Age, the symbolism on this cover kinda acts as accidental foreshadowing for something that will happen in the movie. I'll talk about that when the movie gets around to it. Just keep that in mind. Aside from the aforementioned Superman symbolism, there isn't too much to talk about concerning the art for the cover. Other than that, the clouds shown here look very beautiful. Oh, and my favorite aspect of this cover, the tagline used to market the film, "You'll believe a man can fly." As opposed to Superman 4, where you'll believe a man can be filmed in a wind tunnel so his cape moves around a bunch. Moving on from the cover, the film begins with black and white footage of a child reading an issue of Action Comics and talking about politics.
In the decade of the 1930s, even the great city of Metropolis was not spared the ravages of the worldwide depression.
Unlike Gotham, which would be spared the ravages of said depression until the 1980s.
In the times of fear and confusion, the job of informing the public was the responsibility of the Daily Planet.
Movie? Don't you think it's a little early to begin talking about the Daily Planet? I mean, we haven't even been introduced to Superman yet, so why are we giving so much attention to his day job? Following this chromatic display, we are treated to an epic opening credit sequence before we get to our real introduction to the movie on the planet Krypton. A planet that is so white, vanilla ice is strictly forbade from coming within 100 light years of it, lest the entire planet turn completely transparent. It is here where we come across Marlon Brando in the role of Jor-El, Krypton's top scientist, who is currently suing his old buddy, General Zod, and 2 of his co-workers, for starting the end of the world.
These are matters of undeniable fact.
Oh, thank you, Jor-El. Honestly, you're too kind.
I ask you now to pronounce judgment on those accused.
Oh, well, I'm sure we can all agree that a community service sentence will be the final verdict, so long as none of them do anything stupid like, say, threatening the prosecution.
You will bow down before me, Jor-El! You will bow down before me! Both you, and then one day, your heirs!
Alright, fuck it. I say guilty. What say you, giant ghost heads?
Guilty. 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 Die.
Right then, Zod and Co., you are hereby sentenced to imprisonment inside this unfinished album cover until the writers need a set of antagonists for the sequel. Following this, Jor-El puts on his finest glowing clothes and meets up with the other movers and shakers of Krypton. It's here that he discovers, much to his dismay, that they all have the same suit, and that none of them believe his end-of-the-world theory.
Will you abide by the Council's decision? I will remain silent. Neither I nor my wife leave Krypton.
My newborn son, on the other hand, will be launched into space as soon as I get home. I swear to God, if I have to change another diaper, I'm going to snap somebody's neck. And now it's time to play Spot the Main Character. And so, preparations are made to send baby Kal-El off to Earth inside a giant Christmas decoration. And people said Man of Steel had obvious Jesus symbolism.
You will travel far, my little Kal-El.
You shall go to Matanui, collect the 6 Nuva stones, and free the Barog from their prison. All joking aside, this is a really emotional scene with some great acting, and it isn't the only one in the film either. In fact, there are a bunch of these throughout the film. So many, in fact, that if I stopped to talk about all of them, we'd be here all day. As such, don't be surprised when I skip over these in order to get on with the review. Before sending his son off, Jor-El pimps out Kal's spiky ship with a nice bit of green crystal bling. It's a good thing he finished building his son's ship when he did, as Krypton is having a slight apocalypse. Ironically, Kal-El is launched into space, just as Krypton's ruling council realized they fucked up. And after several minutes of red light and shaky cam, Krypton finally goes the way of the Michael Bay film. Fortunately, Kal-El was far enough away from the explosion to avoid over-dramatic camera work, and he makes his way to Earth. There he is found by the Kents, Jonathan and Martha.
Why did you say that name?
Shut up! And after helping them with their auto repairs, they agree to give him food and lodging. Thus, Kal-El was adopted by the Kents, renamed to Clark Kent, and brought up in the small farming community of Smallville, Kansas, where his teenage years proved to be a difficult time because some reason I can't remember right now. That, and he was forced to deal with the setup for Superman 3. During this troubling time, his only outlet of stress relief was kicking sporting equipment into space while no one was looking, and outrunning trains while almost no one was looking. On the plus side, at least his father was always there for him.
Yeah, I know. You can do all these amazing things, and sometimes you think that you will just go bust unless you can tell people about it.
I mean, every time I get the football, I can make a touchdown.
That's for sure.
Every time.
When you first came to us, we thought that people would come and take you away because when they found out, you know, the things you could do, and that worried us a lot. And there's one thing I do know, son, and that is you are here for a reason. I don't know whose reason, whatever the reason is, you know. But I do know one thing. It's not to score touchdowns. Huh?
Aww, ain't that a heartwarming father-son moment right there? Oh, I just remember what that first thing was. Clark's teenage years were a difficult time because his father died of a heart attack. Wait, what?
Oh, no.
I knew I shouldn't have drank all those haywire energy drinks, but they're just so tasty. Needless to say, the sorrow of not having a dad anymore is keeping Clark up at night. That, or this green crystal that seems to be psychically calling out to him. It could also be that. And this brings us to my first big nitpick of the film. Namely that, whilst the crystal calling out to Clark makes sense, I feel they could have done one better. Rather than having the crystal call out to him, it would have been better if Clark, still grieving Jonathan's passing, goes into the barn at night looking for some form of reconciliation. While in there, he notices something glowing green underneath the floorboards and, upon further inspection, finds the crystal in the remains of the ship he came to Earth in. Not a change that affects the plot in any real way, but I feel that having Clark go out to the barn because he was still emotional about his surrogate father's passing would have been a bit better than having the crystal psychically dial him up. Speaking of strong visuals, at dawn we are treated to a very nice one where Clark tells Ma Kent that he has to go and find his own way in the world. Truth be told, there isn't much I can do in the form of justice for this scene, and it really is better if you see it for yourself. One thing I can say though is that this bit where the two hug, then stop, only to go right back to hugging is just so sweet. Dare I say it's downright...
Do you know where you're headed?
North.
It's a beauty way to go.
So Clark heads off to Canada. Given that this movie is based off of a comic book, that means that there is about a 50-50 chance that the Great White North is a desolate wasteland in this universe. If that's the case, then Clark couldn't have picked a better place to build his A Fortress of Solitude by throwing his green psychic crystal into an icy sea. Oh, by the way, Clark throws his psychic crystal into an icy sea to create the Fortress of Solitude, complete with Marlon Brando's recorded consciousness on CHS.
The knowledge that I have matters physical and historic. I've given you fully on your voyage to your new home.
Admittedly, you couldn't understand any of it because you were an infant, but trust me, it'll make teaching you pretty much everything ever way easier.
There are questions to be asked, and it is time for you to do so.
Who played Mrs. Howell on Gilligan's Island? Natalie Schofer, naturally. And so, Clark spends 12 years in the best university tutelage ever of all time. And I do mean it is the best. Not because he has all the time in the world to study. Not because every course is taught by his own loving ghost father, who, presumably, helps him with his homework. Not because he gets the entire campus to himself. Not even because his time here transforms him into the quintessential Superman actor, Christopher Reeve. No, the reason that this is the best university plan ever is because of all that, and the little fact that the tuition is 100% absolutely positively free. The privileged bastard. Admittedly, he didn't get a recognized degree out of the deal, but that sure didn't stop him from getting a high-paying job at one of the most well-known newspapers in the world. Speaking of, it is here we finally get to see Superman's day job, the Daily Planet, and meet some of his co-workers, including the super-dedicated journalist Lois Lane, the super-sedulous editor-in-chief Perry White, and the I'm also here, guys, photographer Jimmy Olsen. I won't be going into much detail about these characters, as only one of them, Lois, really affects the plot in this movie, so I'm just going to move on to a character that has an even greater effect on the plot. The antagonist. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Lex Luthor, played by the incomparable Gene Hackman. Oh, and there's also this woman, Eve Tessmacher, a character who was created entirely for this movie and the sequel, and another version of her would later show up in the 2015 Supergirl series. More on this when I review Superman 4.
You're really sick.
If you're so disgusted by the man, then why are you working for him? Trick question, it's because he's played by Gene Hackman. Speaking of, Gene Hackman as Lex Luthor is amazing. Not only is he such a good actor that I don't care that he only shaved his mustache to play the role of a bald man, he also has some of the funniest lines in the film, especially when partnered with his two underlings. The aforementioned Eve Testmacher, played by Valerie Perrine, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, and Otis, played by Ned Beatty. All three of these actors have some of, if not the, funniest lines of dialogue in the entire film.
Any questions, class?
Wonder what they're wearing in Addis Ababa.
Looks like a burnous. You know, just a wraparound.
I'm surrounded by idiots.
Seriously, their scenes are worth the price of admission alone.
What more could anyone ask?
I know, right? Anyway, back at the Daily Planet, something extra controversial just fell right into Perry White's lap.
Olsen! Yeah? Get this Loch Ness update right into composing.
Nessie under investigation for share fraud and insider trading. I knew it! Lois, on the other hand, is too preoccupied to be concerned with a giant aquatic cryptid, or Clark's meek attempts to ask her out. Why? Because she's off to interview somebody, not really sure if they're important. And nothing short of an improperly secured cable damaging the helicopter that she'll be transported in will stop her. Well, I sure jinxed that up now, didn't I? Sorry. And, at only an hour and 8 minutes of a 143-minute movie, we finally get Superman doing some Supermaning. That might seem like a complaint, but seeing as everything up to this point has been so well made, what with the great acting and writing, that statement is more of an objective fact rather than a negative criticism. Oh wait, I'm talking over the scene where Superman saves Lois from falling to her death, aren't I?
Easy, miss. I've got you.
You've got me! Who's got you?
Caesar Zappelli with some icicles. Obviously. But when the helicopter finally falls off the building, Superman simply reaches his hand out and catches it. And for those of you who are about to comment in a petty and vehement fashion about how so much of this movie is physically impossible and wouldn't happen in our reality, I offer this as a rebuttal.
Ooh, nobody gives a shit.
Now that we have that established, let's see what Superman and Lois have been up to. Oh, they're back on the roof now.
Who are you?
A friend.
A scene I'm sure will never be repeated in any other superhero movie ever. So Superman flies off into the night, where he then proceeds to foil a cat burglar, captures a group of armed robbers as they're making a getaway, and saves a plane carrying somebody important, but I just can't put my finger on who that might be, from crashing after one of its engines gets blown up by lightning. Hey, wait a minute! What was it Superman said to Lois Lane about flying not mere minutes ago?
Statistically speaking, of course, it's still the safest way to travel.
I have a sneaking suspicion that the statistics are conspiring to make a fool of Superman. Well, it didn't work. Now everybody's gonna see him as a hero. Also, he gets a small girl's cat down from a tree, and then this happens.
Mommy! Risky was stuck in the tree. This man swooped out of the sky and gave him to me.
Haven't I told you to stop telling lies?
Ooh boy, is that lady gonna feel sorry when she reads the morning paper. Speaking of, the first appearance of Superman is kinda big news, but even bigger news would be getting an interview with Superman. Something Perry White knows, like the color of his own shirt.
We're sitting on top of the story of the century here.
So he sets about getting the planet's reporters stoked to interview the Flying Wonder. But it seems all of their efforts will be in vain, as Lois might have just received a very important tip-off. A tip-off that Clark seems to be very pleased that she got, for some reason.
Does he have a girlfriend?
Jeez, Mr. White, could you make it any more obvious that this supposed interview is really just a date? Unfortunately, it seems that Superman is running a little late for said interview. And this is really upsetting Lois.
Story of my life. Cinderella bites the dust.
Watch out, we got a punk rock writer over here. Of course, Superman shows up fashionably late, just like last night when he saved her from falling to her demise. Careful now, Superman. Make a habit of this, and one of these days you might just be too late to save her. And so, Lois and Superman have their interview, complete with questions, flirting, retelling Superman's origin, nonchalantly revealing one of his weaknesses.
I sort of have a problem seeing through lead.
Well, I'm sure that won't come back to bite him at all. Also, he tells Lois who his favorite female singer/songwriter is.
I like Pink very much, Lois.
Meh. Personally, I would have gone with Masami Iwasawa. But I know why you're all here. It's to see Superman take Lois for a flight over Metropolis, and it is absolutely majestic. Truth be told, I won't be able to do this sequence any justice in this review, due in no small part to how much else in this review I have to cover. Never mind YouTube's copyright guidelines that require I chop this movie up if I want to show any of it. That established, I'll still mention a few of this sequence's highlights, such as Superman flying Lois from Metropolis to New York in no time at all, holding Lois aloft on nothing but his fingertips, Lois accidentally falling, don't worry, he catches her, and Lois wondering for several minutes if Superman can read her mind. But alas, all good things must come to an end, as Superman takes Lois back to her apartment, says goodnight, and then proceeds to fly off into the night. Seeing as Lois Lane is an accomplished Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter, I bet she'll say something truly profound to describe the incredible experience she just had.
What a Superman.
God damn it, Barb!
I'm feeling a bit of Gene Hackman withdrawal. Better check and see just what Lex Luthor is up to. Oh, not much really. Just having some of the wittiest dialogue in cinema history, figuring out that a random meteorite can hurt Superman, and covertly arming 2 nuclear missiles right under the noses of the military convoys transporting them. You know, average everyday Lex Luthor stuff. Also, this happens after Lex finds out that Otis messed up setting his set of directional vectors.
Gee, Mr. Luthor. Oh, I see. I guess my arm wasn't long enough, see?
Otis, would you like to see a long arm? Otis, would you like to see a very, very long arm?
No, Mr. Luthor.
Otis, no,
And that's why Otis has a black eye for the rest of the film. Following this, there is an abrupt and somewhat jarring cut to Jimmy Olsen and Lois Lane in the California desert. It doesn't really flow with the rest of the film's pacing, but there is an explanation for why the filmmakers did this. See, the stuff with Lex Luthor that happened between Lois's Superman interview and now are supposed to have happened over the course of a couple of weeks. I know this because not only is it kind of easy to figure out, but the film also implies that a couple of things happened off-screen between then and now. As such, it does make sense why the filmmakers would do this, so I can't really complain. I just wish they communicated it a little better. But you can't have everything. Now, what's Lois doing out in the California desert anyway?
As you know.
Usually I would rag on this line of dialogue, but let's face it, newspaper reporters are probably some of the few people who would use that line of dialogue in real life. Aside from that, what she is doing is interviewing this Native American guy who just sold some of his land to an anonymous buyer. And why did he sell it exactly?
At the stupid high price he offered for this worthless piece of desert, I hope it's custom.
Shots fired! Wait a minute. If Lois is in California, and Jimmy is in California, and the native guy lives in California, and Lois is driving the car, and Superman had that part-time job being one of the plane engines for Air Force One, then is Perry White flying the plane? Nope. He's still at the planet giving a pep talk to Clark. This is interrupted by Lex Luthor contacting Superman via a high-frequency broadcast.
Only one thing alive with less than 4 legs can hear this frequency, Superman, and that's you.
We understand that you have come tonight to bear witness to the sound of drum and bass. We regret to announce that this is not the case, as instead
In approximately 5 minutes, a poison gas pellet containing propane lithium compound will be released through thousands of air ducts in the city.
Needless to say, Superman doesn't like the sound of any of this. On multiple levels. So he flies off to find Lex Luthor and stop this dastardly scheme. Fortunately, locating the source of a high-frequency noise is very easy when you have super hearing. Needless to say, it doesn't take long for him to find Lex.
All right, Luthor, where's the gas pellet?
Somewhere in the back of my mind, actually.
Oh, my dude, you just got pranked. Bet you didn't see that one coming, huh?
So, let's get this straight. In the setup for this film's climax, Lex Luthor says he's going to gas some buildings filled with innocent people, but that's really just a lie to set up for his real plan? Son of a bitch! Superman 1 stole from M. Night Shyamalan's Glass! And just like that, the nukes are launched, and Lex tells Superman all about his evil plan.
As you may or may not know, I am, as they say, very heavy into real estate.
Evil!
In order to make money in that game, you have to buy for a little and sell for a lot, right?
So you're gonna challenge Superman to a couple rounds of Monopoly? Bruh! Do you wanna die? Because the Joker tried that, and look how well that turned out.
The San Andreas Fault, maybe you've heard of it.
Only every time somebody makes a cheesy, low-budget earthquake movie.
Everything west of this line is the richest, most expensive real estate in the world.
Everything on the other side has been leased out to Project Freelancer for military training purposes. I hear they've done some great things with Capture the Flag.
It occurs to me that a 500 megaton bomb planted at just a proper point would
destroy most of California. Millions of innocent people would be killed. The West Coast, as we know it, would
fall into the sea.
And at long last, we now know who was bankrolling Team Aqua. Anyway, Lex's plan is basically to drop some rocks, make everybody drown, name a bunch of places after himself, and then profit. Speaking of, isn't it about time for those missiles to malfunction?
That's impossible! What the hell's happening, Lieutenant? Trajectory malfunction, sir!
Get IT on the line stat!
Hello, IT. Have you tried turning it off and on again?
Function negative, sir!
Okay, well, are you sure that it's plugged in?
Absolutely impossible, sir. They have the new P-20 low-level avoidance systems.
And in a rather brilliant bit, Lex convinces Superman that he has a detonator that can destroy both rockets. This causes Superman to search the room with his X-ray vision. When he finds a lead box that his vision won't pierce, he automatically assumes the detonator must be inside.
Oh, that's real nice.
So yeah, Superman has just been exposed to kryptonite for the first time, and for a man who's just now feeling pain after about 30 years of being completely invulnerable, the man is handling himself pretty well. All joking aside, Christopher Reeve does a truly amazing bit of acting here. Not that his acting throughout the rest of the film hasn't been amazing, but if you asked me which scene in this movie was his best, I'd have to say it'd be this one. This is because, when it comes to the Superman comics, the nature of the medium basically necessitates that the effects of kryptonite be accompanied by a metric ton of green radiation effects. This is done because even with the best artists in the industry, there's only so much non-moving human shapes can do to convey pain caused by radioactive space rocks. Now, when it comes to the medium of live action, they could use the same tricks if they want to waste far too much money on effects that will be 5 times less convincing than anything the source material could come up with. This is where the actor's ability to convey emotion comes into play, as it is what will either make or break the premise of a superpowered entity being hurt by the mere existence of a green brick. And needless to say, Christopher Reeve absolutely sells the idea that he is being absolutely devastated by this little bit of emerald bling. I mean, just look at this. Throughout this entire sequence, the man perfectly conveys the feelings of confusion, sharp-shooting pains, fatigue, loss of balance, being unable to breathe, and seasickness. And those are just a few of the negative bodily afflictions that Christopher Reeve goes through during this bit. But that isn't even the biggest reason why I like this scene so much. No, that'd have to be that Mr. Reeve's acting is so good, you can almost feel the pain he's conveying. Speaking of which...
Oh, Matt Newey, I looked at it too long.
Anyway, Lex puts this bit of kryptonite around Superman's neck and throws him in a swimming pool to drown, albeit not before telling Supes that the second missile is headed for Hackensack, New Jersey. A statement that is news to a certain someone's ears.
Lex, my mother lives in Hackensack.
Don't look at me. Otis set the directional vectors on that missile. Seriously, it's never said out loud in the film, but the implication is that if Otis hadn't messed up setting the vectors on that missile, it wouldn't be heading for Hackensack. Which means that Mrs. Tessmacher wouldn't have saved Superman from drowning, so long as he went after the East Coast-bound nuke first, mind you. So yeah, the entire reason that Superman escapes his chlorine-bound fate is all because of a mistake made by one of Luthor's underlings.
Why, it's the most brilliantly diabolical leader of our time, surrounding himself with total nincompoops.
So Superman flies off to stop the eastbound missile. Naturally, he catches up to it in almost no time at all and starts pushing it out of the atmosphere. Lex Luthor is, of course, not pleased by these events. Don't look at me! Otis set the directional vectors on that missile. Well, Superman finally got that first nuke out into space. Wonder how much time he has to stop the second one. Ah, shit. And just like that, California starts on a violent, destructive, and non-consensual path of succession from the United States. Rocks are falling, gas stations are blowing up, cars are crashing, statewide infrastructure is crumbling, and you just know somebody's gonna blame Jimmy Carter for all this. Fortunately, Superman is able to solve this problem in the most Superman way possible, flying through the Earth's mantle until he finds the spot where the two halves of the fault line are supposed to connect, and he puts them back together with his bare hands. Soup's job doesn't stop there though, as he still has to deal with the damage caused by the earthquake, such as stopping a school bus from falling off the Golden Gate Bridge, becoming one with the train track in order to avoid a derailment, and when a dam bursts, he makes his own dam, presumably with blackjack and hookers. Even with all that done, he still can't help but feel like he's forgetting something. Gee, you think it could be that Lois is being crushed by the very Earth itself? 'Cause if it isn't that, my only other guess would be that Clark left the water running at home. But yeah, Superman arrives just seconds too late to save Lois Lane from dying. Needless to say, he doesn't take it well. And this leads to a moment that I'm sure you've all been just waiting for me to talk about since this review started. Remember when I was talking about this film's cover, and I said that it has a tone similar to that of a Golden Age comic book? And how I said that something in the cover acts as foreshadowing for something which happens later in the film? Well, we've finally reached that point. As foretold by the silver Superman symbol on the film's cover, the film comes to a screeching halt to give us this bit of Silver Age BS as Superman, I shit you not, flies around the world to turn back time and get the result that he wants. So, where do I even begin? Should I start with the fact that this moment is just so ridiculous, I am now just waiting for Kal-El to fire mini versions of himself from the palms of his hands? Or maybe I should bring up the fact that if Superman was fast enough to pull this shit, he should have easily been able to stop both nukes? Or perhaps I should bring up the fact that saving Lois in this way completely destroys all of this film's narrative stakes, as there is now no earthbound problem that the Man of Steel can't solve by spinning to win and save scumming. Perhaps I should even start with the fact that if there is any moment in this movie that will put you off of liking it, it is this moment and this moment alone. Honestly, I think the only way I can take this scene seriously without dragging this review on for any longer than it needs to is like this. But now, with that out of the way, how's Lois doing?
You know what happened to me while you were off flying around? I was almost in an earthquake. I had this gas station blow up beside my car. There's telephone poles falling all over the road.
Well, look on the bright side, Lois. At least you weren't sucked into the earth and crushed to death.
Well, sorry about that, Lois. But I've been kind of busy for a while.
I'm sorry. It's all right.
And now, we finally get a scene where our two romantic leads kiss.
Hey! Thanks a lot, Superman!
Uh-oh, it looks like someone else just blundered in and ruined the moment.
Well, seeing as there is now no longer any reason to stick around, Superman flies off to take care of something, leaving Lois and Jimmy to ponder the significance of these events.
Golly, Miss Lane. It's too bad Mr. Kent wasn't here to see all this.
Yeah, poor Clark. Never around when... Clark, wait a minute.
What?
Lois Lane, that is the silliest idea you've ever...
There is absolutely no way that Clark and Superman are the same person. After all, Clark parts his hair on the right and Superman parts his hair on the left. That totally makes them different people. Seriously though, one detail I really love about this film is that Superman parts his hair differently depending on which identity he's using. Not only that, but his hair also matches both of his father figures. Parted on the right for Superman and Jor-El, parted on the left for Clark and Jonathan. Except for when Clark was a teenager. I guess his hair just naturally parts on the right side of his head. And now I'm left wondering how long it took Jor-El's ghost to teach Kal-El to part the hair on the opposite side of his head. As for why Superman flew off, it was to take Lex Luthor and Otis to jail.
Good evening, Warden. I think these two men should be safe here with you now so they can get a fair trial.
I was originally going to drop them off at Arkham Asylum, but some edgy guy in a batsuit told me it wasn't worth the trouble and redirected me here.
Who is it, Superman? Lex Luthor!
And before anybody asks how this is possible if Gene only shaved his mustache for this film, he's wearing a bald cap for this scene. And with the day saved, Superman flies off into the end credit sequence, to live happily ever after until 3 years later when the sequel would be released. Speaking of credit sequences and sequels, I can't wait to see what this film's end credit scene is. Never mind how it teases Superman 2. Oh right, older superhero film, so no end credits scene. Anyway, Superman 1 is a very fun movie with a great cast, great production, great music, and effects that still hold up even today. And even though it has a few flaws, only one of them kind of gets in the way of the quality of the film. As such, I give this movie a 7 out of 10, both objectively and personally. Something I should point out is that this movie is filled with a lot of stuff, with the DVD version that I'm reviewing running for 143 minutes. As such, I had to leave out and skip over a bunch of scenes in order to keep this review from going over an hour long, such as the alley mugging, Otis being followed by some cops, and Swell. And that isn't even touching on the 3-hour TV version of the film, which, among featuring several extended and deleted scenes, features a sequence where Superman walks down a hallway of high-level instant death traps to get to Lex Luthor's hideout and is unaffected by all of them. Sure, it sucks that I couldn't comment on or joke about a lot of these things, but that is kind of par for the course when it comes to reviewing things on YouTube. The point being that, even though I'll try to go over everything an item has to offer, I'll have to skip over a lot of stuff when doing a review, lest a single review go on for 5 hours. But we really are getting off topic, so I should bring this all back on track before the tone of this review gets even more confused. Speaking of, when it comes to this movie's tone, it has an almost identical feel, tone, and structure to a comic book from the Golden Age. What with its light tone, paragon hero, hammy yet sinister villain, climax that involves nuclear missiles being used to cause an earthquake, and a sequence of the hero saving people and stopping crime that demonstrates how powerful and heroic they are. Honestly, the only thing in this movie that doesn't feel like it came out of the Golden Age is the time travel bit that, I already said, feels like something from the Silver Age of comics. But that's just the film as a comic book. What about the film as a film? Well, among this film's strengths are an aforementioned amazing cast, great score, amazing cinematography, super convincing effects, and the aforementioned likeness to a comic book. All of these elements come together not only to make the characters leap off the screen in much the same way they leapt off the page, but also to make a gosh darn good film.
What more could anyone ask?
In fact, some might even say that this film isn't just gosh darn good, it's swell. That idiocy aside, am I saying that this film is devoid of flaws? No, of course not. But seeing as none of the film's flaws, apart from that one, really get in the way of the story, as such, I don't really have all that much to say about the film's flaws. So, does this mean the film is great? Duh, of course it is. Does this mean that the film is something you can watch a million times in a row and never be bored by? Not really. As you will probably watch it once or twice before being just a little bored with it and going off to do something else. So does that mean this film is tedious? No, it just isn't the kind of film you're likely to take with you to watch endlessly on a desert island. Duly note that the 3-hour TV version might be an exception to this. But if you're looking for an amazing Superman movie, then this is the film for you. And that was Superman 1, my first review ever. If you liked it, then maybe you should leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, and come back next week when I'll be doing my second review, which will also be my first comic book review. Until then, have a nice day.
Tell me something, Lex. Why do so many people have to die for the crime of the century?
You can't have a Kansas City shuffle without a body.